Yes, we are keeping with our focus, which is 50 years after the Civil War, 50 years after Biafra. We're focusing on healing, reintegration, and re-engagement. We've got Mr. Sam Ohabonwa, OFR, here with us this morning. He's a man of many caps. He's the president, Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, former chairman, Nigeria Economic Summit Group, former president, Nigeria America Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and then he was a company commander during the Biafra War. Thank you for coming on this morning, sir.
Thank you.
So, well, first, I need to get your views about this finance matter. I mean, having been an economic person yourself, even though the Honorable says it's fantastic, but that means it means different things to different people. But looking at that from your perspective, what do you think about that act?
Well, I think it's a good attempt to try and essentially document some of the practices that were already undertaken. A couple of reforms have happened, but they have no legal backing. I think that's one of the great things about this. Like talking about self-assessment and all that, it's already ongoing, but I think there's a documented legal backing behind it. Secondly, I also think that every government needs to make effort to increase revenue, especially when we have problem with balancing our budget. The deficit has been climbing. So it's natural for government to seek ways to increase revenue. But the other side of it is that nobody really enjoys additional taxation except you're having free money. If you work for your money, you sweat to get it. You are not very enthusiastic to hand it over to anybody, worse to government, especially in our climate where there's a general dissatisfaction with the way government spends its money, the one it gets from oil and then the one it gets from taxation. So Nigerians will be much, much happier to pay tax if they begin to see how that money is used. There was a time I wrote that I was willing to pay more taxes in Lagos because I saw Lagos transform. I've lived in Lagos for several years, and I saw Lagos transform. When they introduced sales tax, when Tinubu introduced sales tax, I was a manufacturer association, a leader. We fought him. But later on, we saw that the sales tax was being fairly used to transform the environment. So Nigerians, I believe, were willing to pay more, but they don't want to pay more when they cannot see, when all the roads across the country are in descript situation. When there's armed robbery, kidnapping all over the place, they're asking, what is the money going to be used for? So I think the challenge is not in making the law and increasing tax, but to utilize it in a more efficient manner so that Nigerians will get value for their money, and I believe they will be willing to pay more. Well,
it's something that there'll be more questions for the authorities, especially there'll be no reason whatsoever not to publish the accounts. Finance Ministry, they've got to publish some of these things. If people are going to pay more, we need to see what our monies are being used for, and they need to make themselves available to answer all of those questions. So it's about accountability. So if it's going to be 7.5%, then they should expect more questions. Maybe all those sirens that they blow on the road, they need to stop it.
Exactly.
Because I won't use my tax money to allow all of those things to happen. So that's just an aside. But now, coming back to this, 50 years after, I mean, there are several people who cover the program. People don't know that they have many caps and the role they played at that time. So people try to see how they can reconcile the people they know and that role at that time. I mean, you also happen to be one. But we also do know that there are different narratives out there. There isn't a collective approach to documenting what transpired at the time. For instance, there are different narratives about what actually caused the war in the first place.
Well, I think the issue is that if a nation loves itself, if a nation thinks about posterity, if a nation thinks that it is an ongoing and continuous organization that will live many, many years, it will be interested in creating the right history. Certainly, history is written from the eyes of the beholder. As they say, the beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, the participant. So often, much history is written, when it especially relates to war, is written by the victor because he has the command and the power. But the truth of the matter is that the major cause of the war was that some soldiers intervened in the politics of Nigeria. And they mismanaged it. And the mismanagement went out of hand. Because I kept saying that if the problem was the first coup, 1966, which was seen as predominantly Igbo biased coup. That was the way it was seen. Then July coup was predominantly Northern coup, biased coup. If it had ended at that, it would have been tit for tat. You killed our people, we kill your own, no matter what was the motivation. But then the military went beyond that and pushed it to the civilian arena and got ordinary Nigerians, especially of the southeast origin, who were living in different parts of the country, particularly in the north, they became victims. They became victims. They were chased, they were killed. I mean, that is indisputable. No, anybody that denies that does not fear God, because that's the truth. What made the Igbos run away? What made them run back to Nigeria? Why do we start talking about Aburi? It all happened because people were pushed from where they were living. They ran back. And I can tell you, with the fear of God and on oath, that I know that after a while, assurance was given that the matter had been settled. Ojukwu made an announcement asking Igbos, return. Go back to your places. And many adventurers, and you know why they will go. They have their investment, they have their houses, they have their things in those areas. And they went back, another final series of killings happened. And people ran back. And then Ojukwu, representing the East, and Gowon representing Nigeria, people met and said, how do we solve this problem? When two people are fighting, one way to do it is to separate them. Even when wife and husband have serious problems, especially when it comes to battering and beating, one of the things, let them stay apart for a while and cool off.
Was that when the Ghanaian general intervened?
Yes, that one intervened. That when Ankrat intervened. That agreement in Apuri was just, let's stay a little bit, cool off. Let's have some bit of autonomy, semi-autonomy, or run our affairs, let people cool off, let tempers cool off. We still remain as a country, have common services, but decentralize a bit so that tempers will cool off, and then we can take on from there. That was the agreement. But the truth, as Gowon said yesterday, it was interpretation. The interpretation that Ojukwu and Biafrans had was perhaps not exactly what Gowon and his advisors had. And that was where the whole thing broke down. And then when Nigeria found that the one way to deal with the issue was to break the southeast, to break the eastern Nigeria, and they say if you want to conquer a people, separate them. So they broke down into states. The state creation was essentially to break the east and make it unable to threaten the country, and they created the states. And in return, Ojukwu and the eastern Nigeria decided to declare Biafra, and that was it. If that Apuri Accord had been agreed, I mean, we wouldn't have lost 2.5 million people and lost resources for 3 years, and that took Nigeria back, and which is still causing instability now, just a matter of just agreeing, let's rearrange. Some of these things we're discussing in restructuring. That's all that was. That was also what was being said. Let's. So there will always be different stories, depending on who is talking and who is saying, but there are certain things. If anybody disputes that this is not the major issue, the other details and fine details may differ, but that is the major central issue, that there were coups, and the second coup went beyond mark. It didn't end in killing soldiers or killing political people. It went to Sabongeri, yesterday Patutomi was talking about how he was being chased, his family was being chased in Guzau, and all those kind of plans. Many people have those stories. Right. If that didn't happen, first, there wouldn't have been any war. And if the Aburi Agreement had been agreed and implemented, then we would have not, that war was preventable. But of course, the leaders were young people, and maybe if they were more mature than today,
was the idea of the Aburi Accord, was it supposed to reinstate what we had in the First Republic before the coup, the first coup, which was that federal system that you talked about, where the different regions were strong?
It was not essentially that. What it was that there was a problem. There was enmity. There had been soldiers that used to be friends in the barracks were now enemies because they've killed each other. People that used to live in the same neighborhood were already in battle. So there was distrust and mistrust. So the idea was, can we keep them apart for a while? Let the soldiers, eastern soldiers return to the east. Let the western soldiers return to the west. Let the northern soldiers, let there be some bit of separation. And then let each of those regions or group, or because they still remain as, even though they were called groups or provinces, they still remain a region. Eastern Nigeria, Northern Nigeria, Western Nigeria, Midwest. Let them have a little bit of autonomy, or semi-autonomy to do a few things on their own, while we still retain the common forces. Like that, we're talking about community police. Such things were being said, let's get those kind of things set up. It wasn't essentially returning to the regional, full-time regional structure or activities, because they were still being led by military people. So it was still a military government, and hopefully that military government would then go through a process of democratization and give power to the it was how do we repair things. So I think Ankara sat with them and agreed that this was the right thing to do. Let's create a little bit. But the truth must be told. If we deny it, God knows the truth. And it's been said, I've read a story by the former Akenzua, former Oba of Benin. He was a permanent secretary who wrote that when Gowon came back, they found that he gave, in their opinion, gave too much to Ojukwu. Perhaps Ojukwu was more prepared for the conference than maybe they were, so he gave too much. So they now began to ask him, no, you can't give this, you can't give this. So an agreement had been reached, and some people are now trying to change it, based on their own perspective as to what should be. And that led to the breakdown. So the agreement was not to restore, it was to create some room for healing to take place before we can then come back again and begin to.
Right. I know that this particular war has been described as the worst during the century. Yeah. We know about the casualty figure, you referred to it. Yeah. We know about the humanitarian crisis that eventually gave birth to Doctors Without Borders. Yeah. So we know the loss that was incurred across both sides during the war. But then there's also that part that people say someone always profits from war. So is there a possibility that somehow, somewhere, someone profited from this?
Well, there's a saying in my place that the land of the sick is a good land for the traditional medicine healer. Any medicine healer would like to go to where there is sickness. Of course, those who sold arms, Russian mixed white fights were used, some mercenaries benefited. I think they're mostly external people. Internal people, I really would be surprised, except, of course, those who inherited property. Some property were declared abandoned. Igbo property in some parts of Nigeria were declared abandoned. And so people who didn't have property earned property. And after the war, Igbo people were also prevented from returning to certain places because of these issues. Because if they came back, they're going to probably ask for their property and all that. So if you say anybody gained, those probably were the people that gained. But I don't think the gain was equitable or measured to the losses that we as a country lost. We lost so much in 3 years.
Your reference to Russia suggests that there were some foreign influence of some other countries. Which other countries were part of this and on which side?
On the Nigerian side, I believe that as a sovereign nation, it received support of many nations. First, those are countries in the OAU who believed in the policy of non-interference. That was what OAU said. No nation should interfere in other people's internal affairs. So they had support of many of the countries in OAU. They had United Kingdom, who was the colonial master to Nigeria, and who had Nigeria's commercial interest and other interests, you know, so they would like to protect the status quo. And especially since Shell had become, was a major oil prospecting company, oil had been discovered in eastern Nigeria, and which was a major motivation, because something in my heart tells me that if there was no oil, maybe they would have said, these Igbo people go, or these eastern people go. But the oil that was beginning to become a major income earner for Nigeria was in the southeast, or in the southeastern Nigeria. And this was the major issues. And Shell was involved. So some of those companies, countries that had those commercial benefits played a role in trying to bring the war to an end, supporting Nigeria. Of course, Biafra eventually, through the intervention of people like Zeke, who became ambassador to Biafra, and who went around the countries, got Tanzania, got Ivory Coast, got a few other countries, Zambia, to recognize Biafra, you know. Then we also had support of France. France was a lot more predisposed to Biafra because the most of the French-speaking West African countries were positively, and most of some of the what you call mercenaries, or people who came to help Nigeria, some for commercial purposes, some for altruistic purposes, also were, you know, had French origin. So I thought France was more positively predisposed. So it was when they saw, especially France and some of these countries, saw the human challenge, they saw the carnage, and they saw that Biafra was like, if left, could be completely destroyed. I think that created some bit of empathy or sympathy that brought some of them on board.
What are some of those things that people during the war experienced that, going back to it now, I mean, if you recall now, you would say we should never have this kind of experience? What are some of those?
First, as you know, as I captured in my book, in the Port Harcourt Volunteer, I'm carrying a bullet wound that I had. This hand will have been amputated, if not for the grace of God. I would have been dead. I mean, the book defines and describes the experiences, many of them miraculous. I wouldn't want to go back to that. I wouldn't want my children to. There was deprivation, hunger. I mean, you couldn't, one of the things that affected was loss of freedom. You couldn't go where you wanted to. I like to move around. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go back to school. Children didn't have food to eat. Malnutrition got to the point where children were eating lizards. In fact, lizard became a delicacy. A rat was difficult to find. It got to that level, you know. So, and children were dying because of malnutrition. And that began to attract foreign aids, Caritas International, some of these Catholic and missionary non-governmental agencies began to send some food. And again, that was also part of the block. It was said that if Nigeria was blocked from getting, if Biafra was blocked from getting food, it will force us to surrender fast. It was a policy Nigeria undertook under the guidance of the people who advised General Gowon. So there was hunger, there was food, there was life was itself threatened. People were being strafed. Aircrafts, MiG jets will come to the marketplace, will come to all kinds of places, and people run to cover. Many will be killed, many will be destroyed. So there was hardship, suffering, hunger, and all kinds of things that nobody who saw the war, nobody would want it repeated in his lifetime. Nobody, whether you were a combatant like I was, or you were running away from conscription, hiding in bushes, or you were a child. There were boys brigade, some child soldiers who went to the war and died and were killed. You know, I don't think anybody who was in Biafra or who was involved in the battle, even from the Nigerian side, will want a repeat, truly, because when you hear about 2.5 million or 3 million were killed, it's not only Biafra, people from Biafra alone. Some people from the Nigerian side were killed. Soldiers were killed. You know, other people were killed. So everybody had suffered it. And I would hate to think that anybody who saw that war and the effect would ever want to see another war. I would hate to think.
You know, there are some that are still trying to get some form of closure, from this.
Yeah.
Perhaps they were in their younger years at that point, and it still kind of haunts them.
Yeah.
Maybe not PTSD, something perhaps more. Yeah. So how would you suggest, that we reach closure for these people? Because I think it's really important.
Well, you see, I think the matter has been excavated by the continuous feeling of alienation and discrimination that many of them feel. I don't want to mention any name. A former vice chancellor of University of Lagos was telling us a story of how two friends who were in the same class. One was leading the class and scoring higher marks. Both of them applied to University of Lagos. One was admitted, the other one was not. And they came and said, what happened? And the one said, it is because this one has a catchment area, the other one has a lower grade, and the two children could not understand it. It was devastating for them. Because I came from a particular part of the country, I'm now being treated as a different character, discriminated against. That vice chancellor had to go to Abuja and get a particular permission to give him an exemption to admit that girl. Because she couldn't explain to her how you live in a country and you score high marks and you are not admitted and people with lower marks are given admission. So there's still a couple of discriminatory things that happen that still make it difficult for that guy to have a closure. He thinks the war is continuing. The privations he had, hunger, thirst, he couldn't go to school. He leaves, returns to his country, the country that spent money to bring him back, and he's still not feeling completely absorbed. So those are the kind of things that still bring those kind of reminders.
Do you think that all of, or some of these recent agitations here and there could be as a result of the fact that the history of what happened during the war is lost on perhaps the younger generation?
Well, that may be part of it, because for some time we stopped teaching history in the schools. And again, as we started with, perhaps there's even no agreeable history, okay? So it's who tells you, whom do you listen to, what version do you hear? I think government should get, if there's any division, should bring people together, those who have memory. The other day, Gowon was speaking. I said, I wish Gowon would write a book on this matter before he returns to his ancestors. We need to bring a closure. And one of the things that brings closure is the truth. Truth heals. But the moment people run around the truth, it just keeps the wound open. So I believe that we need to get people to speak the truth and also treat each other fairly. A country where people still feel that they are not being treated fairly, they are not, their viewpoints are not being taken, they are not treated equally, brings this kind of pain. It's not just being taught history. If your father, you ask your father, what happened? I mean, one of the reasons I wrote my book was children, each time I remove my clothes, my children would say, Daddy, what is this? And I keep repeating. So I decided to put it in the book so that I can read.
To it.
And those, my grandchildren, can read. So their parents will tell them story of what they passed through. And then in their own life, if they begin to see, sometimes, there is something like perception. It may not be real. They may perceive that it's happening. So I think what should need to be done is let's have a holistic approach to healing this wound. And that is what leadership calls for, how to bring minds together and how to remove those things that will still stand on the way to true reconciliation, unity.
What steps were taken at the time the war ended to try to bring everybody together? What kind of reconciliatory moves were made, and were they sufficient?
Those reconciliatory moves were not sufficient at all, because if they were, we won't be here. There was a declaration which was well intentioned, saying no victor, no vanquished. That was a wonderful statement to make. But then we follow it with everybody that had money in Biafra banks will only get 20 pounds. If you had 1 million naira, 1 million pounds, 500 pounds, 20 pounds for you and your children and your wife to start life again. That was tough. That kind of money should have been given at least ex gratia. Everybody get 20 pounds to start life. Those who have money can run your accounts. But everybody who had money. So, no victor, no vanquished. That didn't fit in. And so many other things were not done. I didn't hear of just a few £100 were given to the administrator, Wabia Sika, as additional funding, some £400,000 to help with restructure or revalidation of infrastructure. No, look at what we're doing in Northeast Development Fund. We set up NDDC, National Nigerian for the Southwest. We set up where there was destruction. None of that was done for the Southeast. None for the East, at the time. So there wasn't enough effort to promote the reconciliation. Gowon may have meant well, but you see, the Aburi would have done well if Gowon was the only guy. But he still have advisors, and people come with all kinds of motivations for their advice. Settling scores, political, military. As a leader, you need to discern to be able to take what your heart is telling you is the right thing. Gowon meant well, but he couldn't enforce it fully. And that's why there was not this far-reaching. If there was a proper closure, as you have said, by now, because the truth is, the people who fought the war, the reintegration was wonderful. That's one good thing that happened. Because they didn't stay back in their enclave. They moved out, got into Nigeria, came back to Lagos, went back to Kano, went back to... If you go to those places, Kano, Kaduna, all those places they ran away with, you will never believe they ever ran. They are back, doing their businesses, rebuilding their houses, buying new piece of property, which is the demonstration of the fact that they want a country. They want a country.
Well, a fine place to anchor. That's how far we can go. Mazi Mohabawa, OFR, is the President, Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. He is a former chairman, NESG, former President, Nigeria America Chamber of Commerce. He was also a company commander in the then Civil War. Thank you for coming on this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you, Channels, for what you've done. I think Nigeria will be the better for it, for this series you've done. Congratulations.
Thank you.